She came alone, as quietly as the rain that cloaked Arlington in a curtain of sorrow. The silence she carried was not empty. It was weighted, wordless, almost sacred. She didn't expect to be seen. Didn't want to be. Grief had become a companion too familiar, and she wore it like armor. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. So if you believe in redemptions, second chances, and finding love, these kind of stories fascinates you, so stay tuned with us, because what is coming next that surprised you with joy, happiness, and believing in human kindness? Just subscribe us to connect with us in wonderful journey of human kindness. Let's back to the story. And when she finally knocked on his door weeks later, thinking perhaps she'd just return a borrowed jacket or say thank you, she had no idea what would truly open was not the door, but her own heart. Let me take you back to that morning. The sky was a weeping canvas of gray. Rain fell with relentless purpose, slicing through the chill, soaking everything, skin, stone, and memory alike. The headstones stretched in silent rows, their white faces glistening under the downpour like fresh scars on a sacred field. On Calloway stood still, a lone sentinel of mourning beside one particular grave. She had no umbrella. She didn't care. Her dark hair clung to her rain-slicked cheeks, water carving silent tracks down her face. In her trembling hands, she clutched a worn, tri-folded flag, its corners frayed, its colors muted from too many nights of being held too tightly. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Grayson was taken. 3 years since her world had cracked open and never quite closed again. The rain didn't trouble her. If anything, it felt fitting, like the sky was mourning alongside her, sobbing just hard enough to blur the pain. She stared at the name carved into the stone until her eyes blurred. Once, it had belonged to a man who kissed her forehead and promised forever. A man who dreamed of peace even while marching for war. Now it was just granite and shadow. A sharp gust of wind tugged at her balance, but she didn't budge. Let the cold come. Let it freeze everything inside her that still dared to feel. She didn't hear the tiny footsteps at first, muffled by the wet earth. But then came a soft, almost hesitant voice. "Daddy says you'll get sick like that." Ann turned slowly. There, standing in the soaked grass, was a little girl, no older than 7, bundled in an oversized raincoat and pink galoshes patterned with stars. She held a bouquet of wildflowers bound with twine, like something picked from the edge of a dream. Behind her stood a man. He looked grounded. Worn denim jacket, lean frame, steady eyes, and a plaid green umbrella shielding them both. His beard was neatly trimmed, and his gaze was calm but kind. "She worries about everyone," he said, stepping forward with a small, respectful nod. Ann tried to respond, but could only manage. "It's okay." His eyes dropped to the flag in her hands, soaked and clinging. "He served," he said, not as a question. She nodded, her voice too lost to speak. "So did I," he said simply. "I'm Harlan, and this little one is Eloan." The girl stepped forward, offering the flowers with small, rain-dappled hands. "They're for your person, too." Ann's hands trembled as she took them. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a ghost in the downpour. The silence that followed was not heavy. It felt natural, like a space carved out just for breathing. "You're freezing," Harlan said, shrugging off his jacket and holding it out. "I'm fine. You're not." And something in the way he said it, soft but firm, as if he'd said it to himself before, made her pause. She reached out, hesitated, then slipped into the jacket. It was warm, dry. It smelled of pine and wood smoke and something deeply human. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once, then gently tugged Eloan's hand. "Come on, kiddo. Let her have her moment." As they walked away, Ann watched their silhouettes blur through the rain. Something about that moment, a stranger's small kindness, a child's shared flowers, cut through the haze she'd been trapped in, like a lantern lit in fog. Later that day, Ann sat inside a small olive-green tent pitched on the edge of the cemetery. It wasn't comfort she sought, only proximity. To him, to what was left of him. Hotels felt foreign. This patch of muddy earth felt sacred. She lit a tiny camping stove and boiled water, mostly out of habit. Her uniform shirt hung from the center beam, dripping onto the tarp below. Outside, the rain hadn't eased. If anything, it seemed to press in harder, echoing the weight inside her chest. Then came the sound, footsteps on wet gravel. She unzipped the tent flap and saw him again, Harlan, now holding 2 steaming coffee cups and a cardboard tray. "Hope you're not allergic to caffeine," he said, a half-smile in his voice. She stared, startled. "Why are you here?" He shrugged. "I lost my wife to cancer. 4 years ago. I spent a lot of time talking to someone who couldn't talk back. Figured I'd bring you a cup. People used to do that for me." Her hands, still chilled to the bone, reached out and accepted the warmth. "Thank you." He turned to go, then paused. "Got a propane heater in my truck. Old but works. If it gets too cold, I'll be fine," she said quickly, a little too quickly. He studied her. "I've heard that before, from people who weren't." And then he disappeared into the rain again, his footsteps swallowed by the storm. She stared at the coffee in her hands for a long time, not drinking, just holding. It was the first time in weeks she remembered what it felt like to be seen. That night, the wind howled and the tent trembled. Uncurled into her sleeping bag, still wrapped in Harlan's denim jacket, the flag lay beside her, folded with care. She reached for it more than once, like it could hold her together if the weight inside shattered her completely. She thought of Grayson, of his voice, half erased by static in that final voicemail, of his laughter, of his promise. "No matter where you are, I'll find my way back to you." But he hadn't. And the hardest part wasn't that he couldn't. It was that she could. She could leave. She could live. She just didn't know how. Morning crept in slow and gray, mist curling low over the marble stones, like breath frozen in time. The rain hadn't stopped. It hadn't even taken a breath. It drummed steady on the roof of her tent, like an old hymn whispered by the earth. She sat outside Grayson's grave again. No tears this time, just quiet. She rested the coffee cup from the night before against the stone, like a soft offering, and listened. To nothing. To everything. Then tires on gravel broke the silence. A dented pickup pulled up along the edge of the cemetery. Red tape held together a broken taillight. Harlan stepped out, umbrella in hand, something wrapped in foil in the other. "You can say no," he said as he approached. "But this is my daughter's banana bread. She'd cry if I brought it back uneaten." Unraised an eyebrow. "She made it for me?" "No," he admitted, smiling. "But I'm learning that you only win truth battles with 7-year-olds by telling it straight." A rare smile flickered across her lips. "Thanks," she said. "I can leave you alone." She hesitated. "No," she said. "Stay." He held the umbrella above them both. They shared the banana bread in silence. It was good. Warm. Comforting. Aloan really had a talent, even if guided. She really made this. With a little help. She takes full credit. Unchuckled, quiet, unexpected. It surprised even her. By afternoon, the storm turned fierce. Water seeped through the seams of her tent. Her sleeping bag was damp. The tarp beneath was worse. Her back ached. Her patience wore thin. She didn't hear the truck until headlights flooded her tent. "Aunt," she poked her head out. Harlan stood soaked, hauling a duffel and a propane heater. "I told you," he called. "If it got too cold, you don't have to do this," she said. He met her eyes. "You don't have to freeze either. I'm not your problem." He paused. "Maybe I remember what it's like to be someone's problem." Silence. Thicker than rain. Deeper than pain. "Come with me," he said. "Just for the night. You don't have to talk. You can pretend I'm not even there." She looked back at her tent. Her refuge turned ruin. The flag's edge, peeking from her rucksack, was already stained. And she nodded. His cabin was tucked behind a ridge, 20 minutes from the cemetery. A fire crackled in the hearth. The room smelled of cedar and coffee. Aloan met her with a blanket dotted in stars. She made the guest room, Harlan said, fluffed the pillows twice. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, real, safe. "Thank you," unmouthed to the little girl. That night, wrapped in dry clothes, under cotton sheets, she lay awake as the storm hissed against the windows. The flag sat folded on the nightstand, finally dry. Grief still sat with her, but so did firelight, and the smell of banana bread, and kindness. For the first time in years, she wasn't completely alone. And for one night that was enough. Dawn broke soft as breath on glass. The storm had calmed. Outside, pine needles carpeted the porch like quiet prayers. Mist curled through the trees, like wandering souls finding rest. Aunt stood barefoot in the guest room, coffee warming her hands. She looked at the flag, less like a wound now, more like a relic. Down the hallway, pans clattered. Alohan's voice lifted, full of questions and wonder. That girl, so small, how could she carry so much light? Aunt told herself she should leave before breakfast, but she didn't. When she finally walked into the kitchen, Harlan was plating eggs and bacon. Alohan, tongue between her lips, scribbled in a sketch pad. She looked up, beaming. I made you heroic. And for the first time in 3 years, Aunt believed she might be. If you've ever stood in the rain of your own grief and wondered if anyone would hold an umbrella over you, know this. Sometimes, even the smallest kindness can be the start of everything. Harlan caught Aunt's glance and smiled gently, catching the edge of her wonder as if it were a feather on the wind. I gave her lightning powers, too, he said with a wink. Alohan, his daughter, beamed with the kind of pride only a child's imagination can earn. That's why she has the cape, she declared, flipping the page of her sketchbook to reveal another whimsical drawing. Aunt arched a brow, the smallest smirk tugging at her lips. Ah, that explains everything. With another page turn, Alohan revealed her latest portrait. This one's Daddy. I gave him boots that never slip. Harlan chuckled, low and warm, like the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. He handed on a plate and said, careful, the bacon's hot, but the compliments? Hotter. Aunt sat down, unsure what moved her more, the food or the feeling. She hadn't had a real breakfast in what felt like seasons, not just months. She took a bite, and the flavor grounded her in the present more deeply than anything else had in a long while. This is good, she murmured. Thank you, Harlan replied simply, pouring her a fresh cup of coffee and settling into the chair across from her. He didn't ask anything, didn't fill the space with pleasantries or questions. He just sat there with her, eyes kind, presence quiet. It wasn't probing, it was permission, an invitation for her to just be, to breathe without explanation. And somehow, that was more disarming than any comfort words could offer. Later that morning, Alohan tugged on Aunt's sleeve. Come see something. She followed the little girl through the drizzle, boots splashing in puddles, until they reached a patch of mud near the shed. This used to be flowers, Alohan said with a sigh, pointing at the soggy earth. But it rained too hard. Daddy says they'll come back if I try again. Aunt knelt beside her. Do you believe that? Alohan shrugged. Sometimes I don't, but then I try anyway. And with that simple declaration, something subtle cracked in Aunt's chest. A fault line she hadn't realized was still there. Together, they planted seeds, radish, wildflowers, and a bluebell variety that Alohan insisted on calling Tex bells, her voice mispronouncing with sweet defiance. As Aunt patted the soil into place, her eyes wandered to the cabin. Harlan stood in the doorway, arms loosely crossed, just watching them. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He simply stayed. And something inside Aunt shifted, an ache softening into something like longing. That night, after bedtime stories and an adventure involving a stuffed bunny rescue, Alohan finally drifted off to sleep. The rain had stilled to a drizzle, and Harlan joined on the back porch. They didn't speak at first, just shared a blanket between them and listened to the way silence filled in all the cracks. I know this might not mean anything, Harlan said at last, voice barely above the hush of the rain, but I'm glad you stayed. Aunt stared out into the darkened woods, rain dripping from the porch eaves. I almost didn't, she whispered. I don't do well with people being kind. Harlan didn't look at her. You'd be surprised how many people don't. She turned to him slowly. How did you do it? Survive it. He was quiet a long time. I didn't. Not at first, he admitted, eyes on the treetops. I fell apart quietly, while everyone thought I was being strong. Her throat tightened. She understood that kind of silence too well. But Aloan, he said gently. She doesn't think in endings. Only pauses. An looked toward the window, where the glow of Aloan's night light still flickered. I envy that, she whispered. So do I, he said, finally meeting her gaze. But I'm trying to learn from her. She didn't reply. She just pulled the blanket tighter and let her shoulder lean against his. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just stayed. Back in the guest room, the night whispered around her. The sheets were clean. Her hands lay still on her stomach, breath slow but thoughts spinning. Harlan hadn't asked for a story. Not once. He gave her something rarer than answers, space. And in that silence, she wanted to tell him everything. She opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand. A notebook and pen waited inside, maybe left for guests, maybe forgotten. She opened to the first page, and for the first time in years, she wrote. Not a military report, not a list, not a condolence message, just a memory of who she was, of who she might still become. By morning, the rain had softened to a gentle hum. It clung to pine needles like breath caught in the whispered conversation. It lingered on windows and rooftops, the way grief does, not gone, just quieter. Aunt stood at the window, coffee cradled in her hands. She looked out toward the garden. The seeds were hidden, silent beneath the earth. Not dead, not blooming, just waiting. That felt familiar. She hadn't asked to stay another night, but Harlan hadn't asked her to leave. Their understanding was unspoken but mutual, like an old blanket, warm and worn, that you never quite fold away. Mid-morning brought quiet chores. Looking for a lamp, Harlan said, pointing to the attic ladder. Old house. Porch light blue again. Aunt followed more from curiosity than anything else. The attic smelled of dust and decades. Boxes were labeled in faded ink, Zmaz, tools, baby clothes. One caught her eye, Grayson's letters. Her heart skipped. But no different Grayson. Not hers. She moved past it quickly. Here, Harlan called, rummaging. Might be junk, but let's try it. As he tugged the lamp free, Aunt noticed a weathered canvas pouch tucked behind rafters. She pointed. What's that? He followed her gaze. Clara's dad's. My wife's father. Vietnam vet. Said he kept every letter ever sent to him. Probably just documents. Can I? He handed it to her. She sat cross-legged and carefully unzipped the pouch. Inside were fragile letters, yellowed with age, ink faded like old ghosts. She unfolded one, the paper nearly whispering as it opened. Don't waste your second chances. There are men who won't get them. Live loud enough for both of you. She froze. Not the same handwriting, but the same soul. Almost the exact words Grayson had once recorded for her before his final deployment. If I don't come back, promise me, don't live quiet. Don't just survive. Live loud enough for both of us. Her hands trembled. She had buried that message. Too painful. Too raw. But here it was again, from a different time, different war. Same truth. She returned the letter, eyes wet. Your father-in-law was a wise man, she murmured. He was, Harlan said, the sadness rising in his voice. Lost his brother in Nam. Took years before he could talk about it. But when he did, he said guilt almost consumed him. He just started planting things. Said growing anything was proof he hadn't given up. That struck on like thunder in still air. That evening, Aloan approached with a small wooden box, painted in lopsided red and blue stripes. For your flag, the girl said, offering it solemnly. Aunt opened it. Felt lined inside, the perfect size. No squeaky hinges. Did you make this? Daddy helped. I painted. It's beautiful. Now it won't get wet, Aloan added proudly. Aunt's chest tightened. Thank you, El. The girl's eyes lit up. That's what Daddy calls me. Aunt smiled softly. Then I'm in good company. Later, Harlan offered to walk her to the guest room. She declined. but he waited at the hallway's edge anyway. "I read one of the letters," she said. "Your father-in-law. He reminded me of Grayson." Harlan nodded. "He reminded me of Clara. Sometimes the dead become bridges between the living." She looked down. "I spent so long pretending he was still here. Not because I believed it, but because I didn't know how to be me without him." "I know that feeling," he whispered. "Do you still talk to her?" "Clara, all the time," he said, "but I've stopped waiting for her to answer." On exhaled, the breath more released than air. "You should rest," he added gently. "I will." She turned, then paused. "Harlan." He looked up. "I don't know what this is," she said, motioning between them. "But thank you for not asking me to explain." "I don't need your explanations," he said. "I just need you to know, whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The rain stopped before dawn, but the world still held its scent, pine, damp soil, and embered smoke from the wood stove's quiet vigil. The cabin groaned in the hush of morning, as if it too had bones that needed stretching. On awoke to birdsong and the faint, imagined hum of someone singing. She lay beneath the quilt a moment longer, letting gray light pool around her. The wooden box sat on the nightstand. Inside, the flag rested, no longer just a weight of loss, now a keepsake. Sacred, yes, but not suffocating. She rose, barefoot, and stepped into the quiet hallway. The house had no clocks, no buzzers, no urgent ticking, just the smell of coffee and the soft clang of a pan. Harlan stood at the stove in flannel and jeans, flipping pancakes with focused calm. Al Lowen sat nearby, legs swinging, coloring a sun in deep purple. "Morning," On said, voice still laced with sleep. "I made the sun purple," Al Lowen announced. "It works," On replied. "A purple sun fits around here." "Mugs are in the cabinet," Harlan added, "unless they'll beat you to all of them." "I only needed one." Al Lowen chirped. On chose one with a chipped rim and a cartoon moose. It felt right. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The air was cold, but honest. The sun peeked from behind clouds, cautious but present. The yard was no longer hidden by rain. Dew shimmered on the grass. The garden patch lay quiet, but alive, waiting. Al Lowen tugged her hand. "Come here." She led her to the side of the house, to two old Adirondack chairs under a cedar awning. "My mom used to read here," Al Lowen said, climbing onto one chair. "Dad says the trees make it safe." On eased into the other chair. "He's probably right." From the porch rail, Harlan added softly, "Clara always said trees listen better than people. That's why they never interrupt." On smiled. Then they must love it here. And then she noticed, no wall clocks, no timers, no blinking digits in the cabin. "Is there a reason there are no clocks here?" she asked, turning to Harlan. He paused for a beat, then answered in a voice as gentle as the morning itself. "Because around here, we remember better when we stop counting." Harlan gave a gentle shrug, eyes tracing the memory like smoke. Clara hated clocks, said they rushed her. On blinked, then smiled. "That's kind of brilliant." "She was brilliant," he said softly, the weight of truth in his voice needing no embellishment. The day unfolded like a slow song, one you forgot you loved until the melody found your chest again. Conversations drifted in and out like wind through pine trees, accompanied by warm tea and the kind of silence that asked for nothing in return. While Al Lowen napped and Harlan tinkered with the stubborn shutter outside, Ann found herself alone in the living room, the hush of the cabin wrapping around her like an old coat. Her eyes wandered until they landed on a photo album on the bookshelf, worn in navy, etched with the word family in faded gold. She opened it with reverence. Each page felt like stepping through a portal. There was Clara in her wedding dress, eyes full of wild light and tender joy, her hair coiled like promises. Then Al Lowen, wrapped in blankets, nestled in Harlan's arms. Halloween costumes, candlelit birthdays, small chaotic moments framed forever. One photo caught her, Harlan asleep on the couch, Al Lowen curled on his chest like a contented kitten. And then, tucked near the back, came a photo that knocked the breath out of her. Harlan stood alone in the garden, eyes closed, hands deep in the soil. Beneath it, in Clara's careful, looping handwriting, "When you can't fix what's broken, grow something new." Aunt stared until the words blurred, the truth in them sharp as glass, and just as beautiful. That evening, Aloan pulled on by the hand, her voice brimming with urgency. In her room, the floor was a battlefield of glitter glue, markers, cereal boxes, and scissors. "I want to make a sign for the garden," she declared, "so the seeds know we believe in them." Aunt's chest tightened. "I love that," she whispered. Together, they painted bright purple letters that read "Still Growing," decorated with painted raindrops and smiling suns. When it dried, Harlan helped them press it into the earth. They stood in the misty twilight, gazing at the crooked sign. "It's beautiful," Aunt said softly. Aloan beamed. "Even if they don't grow, they'll know we tried." Aunt knelt, kissed the girl's hair. "Yes, sweetheart. That's what matters." The fire crackled low that night, casting long golden shadows on the log walls. Aunt sipped her tea, the warmth barely reaching her bones. Harlan joined her, sat quietly, not to fill the silence, but to honor it. "You good?" he asked after a while. She paused, considered. "Yeah, I think. I'm starting to remember what that feels like." He tilted his head. Being good. Being still. They held each other's gaze for a long, long time, two souls no longer sprinting from grief, but resting beside it. And then Harlan said, almost inaudibly, "Maybe stillness isn't where life stops. Maybe it's where healing starts." Aunt didn't respond. She didn't need to. This time she stayed. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was floating above herself. She felt anchored. The thunder came without warning. One moment, the cabin hummed with soft wind and birdsong, and the next, the sky cracked open like a bone. The rumble that followed rolled through the valley, shaking windows and memories loose. Aunt froze at the kitchen sink, a mug cradled in her hands. The thunder struck something old in her, something raw. Not the sound itself, but the echo of it. Mortars, alarms, screams. Kandahar. Her breath caught. The mug slipped from her hands. It didn't break, but the sharp clink was enough to startle Aloan. "You okay?" the girl asked from across the room. Aunt forced a smile. "Too fast. Too practiced. Just thunder. Nothing to worry about." But her hands trembled as if they remembered what her voice tried to forget. The rain returned with a vengeance that afternoon, pelting the roof and clawing at the windows. Trees outside bowed under the storm's weight. Harlan came in from the shed, rain dripping from his jacket and hair, carrying a weather-worn parcel in his hands. Mail came late. "Community box by the road," he said. "I think it's for you." Aunt took it with shaking fingers. Her name stared back at her in a sharp, slanted script she knew instantly, Captain S. Malone. She slipped into the guest room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. For a long time, she just stared at it. Then, slowly, she undid the string and unfolded the letter. It was short, too short for what it held. "You should have this. Took me too long to find it. You deserve the truth, even if it's late. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Attached was a scanned duty log. Kandahar base. For days before Grayson's death. LTG Callaway swap duty rotation with LTA Callaway. Voluntary. Confirmed. Aunt's breath hitched. The memory came like the thunder earlier. Hot, unforgiving. That week, she'd been so tired, so hollowed out. Grayson had kissed her temple and said, "You take the night off, babe. I've got it." She thought it was just love, just kindness, a shared burden. But it wasn't. It was a trade. He'd taken her place. Silently, purposefully, she pressed a hand to her mouth and let the sob come. Grayson hadn't just died. He had died for her. And somehow, that made the loss unbearable in a new way. Not nobler, just heavier. She didn't know how long she sat there before the knock came. She didn't answer, but the door creaked open. Harlan stood in the doorway, eyes soft with concern. He saw the report in her lap, the tremble in her hands, the truth written on her face. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. She shook her head, voice strangled. It wasn't supposed to be me. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. He took my shift, she whispered. The night he died. It should have been me. I didn't know. I thought he was just being sweet and I let him. Harlan sat beside her, not touching. Just there. You didn't let him, he said gently. You made a choice. A choice he probably would have made again. That doesn't make it easier, but it makes it his. She stared at the paper in her hands. I've spent 3 years pretending he just disappeared, that I had no part in it. But this, it feels like I was given something I didn't earn. You were given time, Harlan said. That's not something you earn. It's something you choose how to use. She swallowed. Her throat burned. I don't know how to live with that. I didn't either, he admitted. After Clara, I was angry. Angry she didn't tell me how bad it was. Angry she left me with a daughter and no manual on how to be 2 parents. I loved her, and I blamed her all at once. That guilt, it doesn't go away, but it gets lighter when you carry it with someone. That did it. Unbroke. Her shoulders shuddered, and she buried her face in her hands. Harlan didn't fix her. He didn't offer platitudes or reach for her. He simply sat, close enough to feel, far enough to breathe. When she finally spoke, her voice was splintered wood. I feel like I died too. I've just been moving around since. Not really living. Harlan nodded. Maybe that's what grief is. A second life you never asked for. And love, she whispered. He paused. Maybe love is what lets you step into that second life, without leaving the first one behind. They sat like that for a long time, and when she finally looked up, the rain outside had softened. Not gone. Just tired. It was still raining when she left. Not the brutal kind. Just the quiet drizzle of a sky too weary to stop weeping. Unrose before the sun. She dressed in the dark, folded the quilt, placed the box with Grayson's flag into her rucksack. Alohan's drawing, 3 stick figures under a big crooked umbrella, sat on the nightstand. She couldn't pack it. She couldn't leave it behind either. Down in the kitchen, she scribbled a note on the back of a grocery list. Thank you for the shelter, for the kindness, for not asking me to be anyone but broken. I wish I were braver. I wish I could stay. But I need to figure out who I am without someone else's sacrifice. Maybe someday I'll find my way back. She folded the note, tucked it beneath the chipped moose mug, and slipped out the door. When Harlan found the note, dawn was just brushing the clouds with hesitant light. He read the words slowly, like they were in a language he almost understood, but hadn't practiced in years. Alohan entered moments later, eyes bleary with sleep. "Where's On?" she asked. "She had to go," Harlan replied quietly. Alohan frowned, not asking more. Miles away, On sat at a worn-out diner along an empty Virginia highway. The coffee was cold, the grief still hot. She hadn't eaten. The radio hummed a tune too forgettable to matter. A trucker coughed behind her. She stared at the rain-dappled window, unsure where she was going. Only that she couldn't stay still. She pulled the duty log from her jacket pocket. She'd read it a dozen times. The words still blurred in the same place. "I'm sorry, Grayson," she whispered, forehead against the cool glass. It didn't fix anything, but it was true. She didn't notice the old man until he was seated across from her. "Mind if I borrow this seat?" he asked, already settling in. His jacket was soaked, his hat too big. "Sure," she said, startled. He placed a bag of popcorn on the table, opened it carefully. "You're a soldier," he said without looking up. Aunt stiffened. "Were," she corrected. "You carry it like you still are." He nodded at her rucksack. "That flag doesn't belong in a bag," he said softly. "Not when you're carrying it for the wrong reasons." She narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me." He tapped the bag. "Guilt's a heavy thing, but it's not the same as honor. One will crush you, the other'll carry you." Her fists curled. "How do you know the difference?" The man smiled, lines in his face like a map of everywhere he'd been. "You'll know when you stop walking away from where you're meant to be." And with that, he left. She turned back to the window, and that's when she saw it. Outside, beyond the pumps, Someone had drawn on the fog glass of the bus stop shelter 3 stick figures, standing beneath a curved umbrella, still growing. One tall, one smaller, one with curly hair and a cape. Aunt's heart tripped over itself, stuttering in her chest. Her breath caught. She blinked hard, and then she ran. Back toward the cabin. Back toward something that might still be waiting. Inside, Aloan stood quietly by the window, her nose pressed to the glass, watching the rain-painted world outside. "She's not coming back, is she?" she asked without turning. Harlan didn't reply right away. His fingers brushed the folded note still tucked in his pocket, the words still echoing like a ghost in his chest. "I don't know," he said finally. His voice was gentle, worn. "But sometimes people have to leave before they remember where they truly belong." "She left her picture," Aloan murmured, almost like a question. "She'll remember it," Harlan said softly, "one way or another." They stood there together, in the silence she left behind. Outside, for the first time in weeks, the rain had stopped completely. Not cleared, not bright, but still. The kind of stillness that follows a long, relentless storm, where even the trees seemed to take a breath. The ground remained wet, dark with memory, but the sky had finally quieted. Harlan sat at the kitchen table, coffee beside him growing cold. He hadn't slept well the past 2 nights. The house felt tilted somehow, like something essential was missing, some beam of presence or hope. Aloan no longer asked where Aunt had gone. Instead, she folded her drawings into paper boats and floated them across puddles in the driveway, whispering, "Maybe the rain knows where to carry them." That morning, he opened the pantry and found a new sketch taped to the inside of the door. 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one just beginning to come back. By mid-afternoon, Harlan found himself watching the porch again, not expecting, not quite daring to hope, but the quiet felt different, less hollow. He turned toward the sink to pour out the rest of his coffee. And then a knock. Soft, tentative, but deliberate. He froze. Another knock came, this one stronger, as if afraid he wouldn't answer, but more afraid he might. Harlan crossed the floor slowly. His hand hovered over the doorknob. Just one more second. Then he opened it. She stood there, her hair damp from the mist, boots caked in mud, a single suitcase beside her, her jacket zipped up to her chin, and in her hands, a folded piece of paper and a small wooden box. The flag box, its brass edges now clean and polished. "I didn't know if I should knock," Aunt said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't smile. "Not yet, but you did." She nodded. The air between them trembled, fragile, like frost on the rim of a window. "I left," Aunt began, swallowing hard, "because I thought I needed to figure out who I was without him." Harlan said nothing, letting her speak. "But all I did was run. From him. From you. From her. From a life I was afraid I might actually deserve." She looked down at the flag box in her hands, then back at him. "I kept thinking about something you said," she continued. "That love doesn't replace your first life. It just lets you live another, without leaving the first one behind." Her voice cracked. "I think I'd like to try." Harlan stepped back from the door. "Then come in." Aloan heard the door close and ran into the hallway. When she saw Aunt, her face lit up, not in surprise, but with quiet certainty. "I knew you weren't done," the girl said matter of fact. Aunt crouched down, pulling Aloan into a hug tighter than words. "I missed your magic," Aunt whispered into her hair. "I saved some," Aloan replied with a grin. That evening, they sat on the back porch, a worn blanket draped across their laps. The garden stretched before them, rich with damp earth and newborn green. Little sprouts pushed through the soil, hope rising slowly from the dark. Aunt handed Aloan a small envelope. "I picked this up on the way back." Inside was a photo, printed from a grainy security camera at the diner. A shot of Aunt staring out the window, eyes lost in thought. Aloan lit up as if it were treasure. "Is that when you saw the drawing?" Aunt nodded. "I think the rain delivered it." Aloan clutched the photo like it was sacred. Later, as the sun dipped low behind the ridge, The porch light flickered on. Harlan stood beside Ann at the steps, shoulder to shoulder. "I'm not perfect," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Good," he said. "Neither am I." She smiled, small but sure. "I'm still figuring things out." "So am I." They stood in a companionable hush. Ann reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I started writing this the night before I left," she said. "It was supposed to be a goodbye, but I never finished it." She handed it to him. He read the first lines, then the last. "But if I ever find the strength to come back, I hope the porch light is still on." Harlan folded the letter gently, then tucked it into his shirt pocket. "It's always on," he said. Ann exhaled, like her lungs had been waiting weeks to breathe again. Her eyes wandered across the yard, where Aloan had planted a new sign in the soft earth. "Still growing." Ann whispered the words to herself. And this time, she believed them. Spring came in gently. It didn't shout its arrival with color or clamor. It came in softened mornings and lighter skies. The frost slipped back. The wind warmed. And somewhere between coffee and quiet laughter, the land beneath the cabin stopped weeping. Ann felt it first in the smallest ways. The porch steps no longer groaned with cold. The scent of lilacs drifted in through the windows. Aloan began humming again, not out of habit, but joy. And it herself. In the steadiness of her hands when she held the folded flag. In the way her shoulders stayed relaxed when Harlan entered the room. In the way her smile, cautious, still, no longer felt borrowed. That Sunday morning, they stacked firewood. Harlan chopped through cord after cord. Ann arranged the logs beneath the porch. Neat rows of order in a world that still tilted sometimes. Aloan darted between them, hauling kindling in a small red wagon like a one-girl army. "This one looks like a bear," she announced, holding up a knotted log. Ann leaned over. "Looks more like a dragon to me." "Even better." Aloan grinned and tossed it onto the pile with theatrical flair. Harlan chuckled. "At this rate, I'll be building a mythological fire." Ann smiled as she brushed sawdust from her hands. "Maybe that's exactly what we need." He looked at her, really looked. She didn't flinch. That afternoon, Aloan tugged at Ann's sleeve. "Can I show you something?" Of course. The girl led her to the old storage room off the kitchen, a space they rarely used. Inside, Aloan opened a cabinet to reveal a weathered cassette player. Beneath it, a shoebox filled with tapes, each one labeled in Clara's delicate handwriting. "She used to record lullabies," Aloan said, "for when I couldn't sleep." Ann's breath caught. "Do you want to listen?" The girl nodded. They sat on the floor. Aloan inserted a tape. The machine clicked. Static crackled. Then a voice. Warm, gentle, familiar, even to Ann, who had never heard it before. "Good night, my little moon. The stars are waiting. Close your eyes and let the sky carry you home." Aloan rested her head on Ann's shoulder. "I remember this one," she whispered. Ann held her hand. They listened through 3 lullabies. When the tape ended, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt full. That evening, the 3 of them returned to the back porch. The sprouts in the garden had grown taller. The crooked, still-growing sign leaned a little now, withered by time, but still standing. Harlan brought out a guitar, the strings dusty, a bit out of tune. "You play?" Ann asked. He shrugged. "Clara taught me 3 chords. That's all I've got." "That's 2 more than me." "Play the rain song." Aloan clapped. Harlan smiled. "You remember that?" "Of course." He began to strum. Simple, imperfect, but steady. Ann closed her eyes and let it wash over her. The melody felt like it had always existed, like the bones of the cabin had hummed it all along. When he finished, the world felt softer. "I think you've got 4 chords in you," Ann said. He grinned. "Maybe it's time to write a new song." That night, Ann stood in the guest room, fingers brushing the spine of a blank journal. She hadn't written since she returned. Not really, but her mind had begun to shape sentences again. Observations, memories, flickers of hope. She opened to the first page. "Today I stacked wood, sang with ghosts, laughed with a little girl who believes dragons live in firewood." And I believed her. Maybe that's what healing looks like. One unremarkable miracle at a time. She paused, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a soldier pretending to be alive. I just felt here. She closed the journal gently. Outside, the moon hung low above the hills, silvering the roof of the cabin. The firewood stacked beneath the porch glowed faintly in the porch light, as if it held its own warmth. And in the deep hush of the earth, the seeds stirred. Morning arrived with golden quiet. No thunder, no mist. Just soft sunlight slipping through the blinds and sprawling across the floor like a promise. Ann woke early, not from unrest, but from peace. She sat up, letting the sun kiss her skin. The folded flag rested on a nightstand, but beside it now something new. A journal half-filled, its cover worn from use. She ran her thumb along the spine and smiled. Today marked 3 years since Grayson's final patrol. 3 years since the knock on her door. And for the first time, she wasn't drowning in it. She walked barefoot into the hallway, drawn by the scent of cinnamon. Harlan stood in the kitchen, sleeves dusted with flour, humming. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." Figured today needed cinnamon rolls. Ann smiled. "That's unexpectedly perfect." "You okay?" She nodded. "Actually, yeah, I think I am." Later that morning, Ann wandered outside alone, carrying a folded blanket, her journal, and the flag box. The sky stretched wide and open. The wind smelled of pine and earth thawing. She followed the trail past the garden, up the ridge to a clearing Clara had once called her thinking spot. Ann spread the blanket, sat cross-legged, and opened the journal. April 12th. 3 years today. 3 years of silence and rain and what-ifs. But today, I don't feel the weight. I feel the gift. You gave me this time. And for a long while, I didn't know what to do with it. But now I think I'm learning. She paused. I thought I had to live for you. But maybe what you wanted was for me to live for myself. Fully. Deeply. Loud enough for both of us. She folded the journal closed. Then, gently, she opened the flag box. Inside, tucked beneath the folded fabric, was a second letter. One she had written weeks ago, but never read aloud. She unfolded the paper, and with her voice steady, she began. "I promise," she whispered into the wind, voice tender as a lullaby. "I'll remember you in the sound of boots on dry earth, in the golden hush before supper when light rests on the porch, and in the strength it takes to open my heart again." Her fingers lingered on the letter's edge as she folded it back into shape, not with grief but reverence. Then, with quiet finality, she slid it beneath the folded flag, her farewell not as burden, but as rhythm. And in that moment, after 3 long, aching years, she stood. She turned to the open valley below, where the hills leaned gently toward the sky, and for the first time, she smiled. Not only for Grayson, but for herself. Later that afternoon, back at the cabin, the world seemed to breathe again. A checkered cloth flapped in the soft breeze on a picnic table set up outside. A jug of lemonade shimmered with condensation, and a pie, declared a masterpiece by Aloan before it had even cooled, sat proudly in the center, its crust golden, defiant. Ann approached with a curious lift of her brow. "Is this a celebration?" Harlan gave her a soft, steady look. "It's a day," he said simply, "and we're in it." "That's reason enough," Aloan added, grinning. They sat together, passing dishes, laughter curling between bites like song. The silence wasn't hollow. It was full of breath, of new beginnings, of presence. Then Aloan held something out. "I made this for you," she said, eyes bright and serious. It was a drawing, simple but full of heart. A sun with a purple smile, cabin, 3 figures holding hands, and in the corner, small but certain, a green sprout breaking through dark soil. Above it, in crooked, careful letters, "Still growing." Ann stared at it, a tender ache blooming in her chest. She took the paper carefully, like something sacred, and met the girl's gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was a thread of emotion. That night, as stars stitched themselves into the sky, Ann and Harlan sat on the porch steps. Words weren't needed. Her head found his shoulder. His hand settled over hers. The ache still lived in her bones, but no longer a shadow. Something in her had shifted, had tilted toward light. After years of letting time carry her, she was finally choosing to walk beside it. It was early May when the letter arrived, not in an envelope or mailbox, but placed lovingly by small hands. It was creased, fingerprinted, folded into quarters, with a slightly lopsided heart drawn on the back. Anne found it resting on her pillow one quiet evening, after dinner. Aloan had already slipped off to bed. Harlan was outside, stacking tools in the shed. Anne opened it with reverence. Inside, written in blocky, careful letters, "Dear Raven, I'm glad you came back. I think Grayson is too. Love, Aloan." Anne pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes. Grief, once a roaring flood, had changed. It stood beside her now, not as an enemy, but as memory's companion. Not as shadow, but silhouette. That weekend, the three of them walked the trail behind the cabin, up to the ridge where sky and trees met like old friends. The sun was gentle that day, and the air carried the scent of spring, of new things trying their best to bloom. In their hands, they carried one item, the folded flag in its wooden box. Its polish gleamed in the light, the brass hinges cleaned, ready to rest. At the ridge's edge, where the world seemed to open, Harlan placed a small bench, simple, solid, handmade from the same wood as the cabin porch. Anne gently set the flag box upon it, not to bury, not to forget, to rest. She sat in silence for a long while, and then turned to Aloan. "Would you like to keep it here?" The girl nodded with quiet wisdom. "That way, if someone ever sits here and feels sad," she said, "they'll know someone brave sat here before them." Anne blinked back the warmth behind her eyes. "You're quite the philosopher." "I'm 8, Aloan replied proudly. They laughed, and the sound rose into the trees, like music written just for them. That evening, Anne wandered through the garden alone. The radishes had sprouted strong and defiant. Bluebells bowed softly in the wind. The crooked wooden sign that read "Still Growing" stood now surrounded by thriving life. Anne knelt in the soil and added a second sign. It was small, carved from driftwood she and Aloan had found near the river, and etched with a simple truth. "Here's where I returned." That night, rain returned, soft and unhurried, barely more than a whisper. It tapped gently against the windows, ran cool fingers down the cabin walls. But Anne didn't mind. She sat by the window and listened, letting the rhythm carry her. She thought of Grayson, not the uniform, not the folded flag, not the ceremony or the silence that followed. She thought of the boy who danced with her barefoot in a motel parking lot, who sang off-key and laughed too loud, who always insisted she try the pie, no matter how full she was. Who would have loved this cabin, this girl, this man who knew how to stay? For the first time in years, she could remember him and smile. "Thank you," she whispered to the dark. "Not goodbye. Just thank you." As the fire in the hearth quieted to a soft glow, Anne curled into the couch, wrapped in the patchwork quilt Aloan had lovingly dubbed stormproof. A few moments later, Harlan joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He handed her one, warm and sweet, and settled beside her. Not too close, not too far, just right. They sat in silence, and then Harlan turned to her, his voice soft, a question wrapped in hope. "What comes next?" She didn't have to think. "Life," she answered, "with all its mess and music." He smiled. "I'd like to be in it with you." Her head found his shoulder. "You already are." Outside, the rain eased. In the soil, seeds kept reaching, stubborn, slow, and determined. And inside that little cabin, under the soft ticking of time, something sacred took root. Love, quiet, imperfect, enduring, held fast and held true. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop your town or country in the comments. These stories travel farther than we ever dream. And if you'd like more tales of hope, healing, and the quiet power of love, feel free to subscribe. From all of us, thank you for spending time here today. Your presence truly means the world.